Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this NetworkED event. Thanks for coming. I think it's the fourth NetworkED of the year. I should say who I am. My name's Chris Roger. I'm representing LTI, or Learning Technology and Innovation, here at LSE, and we're the ones that organise this series of events. I'd also like to welcome our speaker today, Andy Moss, who is the Senior Vice President for Higher Education at Pearson.
Yes, that's right.
Yeah. Before I hand over, I just want to say a little bit about the theme for this year's series of events. The theme is Uncertain Futures, and when we were thinking about that theme, the intention was to widen the scope of the series, to look beyond the kind of cosy world of UKHE and look more globally or into other sectors to see what kind of directions education and technology are going. So it's fitting that Andy's joining us from the for-profit higher education sector today, and he's going to explore some of the key trends in that space and examine evidence of whether and where technology can contribute to improving access and outcomes for learners. Andy heads up Pearson's UK higher education business, which provides courseware solutions, blending content, assessment and technology, and partnering with universities who want to go from a traditional model of delivery to fully online. Before I hand over, I should also say if you are tweeting, the hashtag is LSENetEd. I always get it wrong, I always end up tweeting LSE NetworkEd, but it's LSENetEd. And I'll hand over to Andy.
Thank you very much. Great. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and great to be here. Thank you for having me. I'm conscious that I do come from the world of the for-profits, so I lead Pearson's higher education business here in the UK. That's all of our activity in higher education in this market. For those of you that aren't so familiar with Pearson, we are a big for-profit education company. We're actually the world's largest education company. We are listed here in London on the FTSE 100 stock exchange, and we operate in over 80 markets around the world. So we are a kind of a big global company playing in this space. We're also 170 years old, and we were born and bred in North Yorkshire. I come from the other side of the Pennines in a place called Bury. But today I'm going to talk about these themes of access and attainment and affordability in higher education, with a specific focus on technology and how we're thinking technology can help solve for what I think are very important themes. And I thought I'd start with just a few simple figures in my mind that kind of really underscore the importance of this kind of topic, and that show why access and achievement and kind of affordability are so important for all of us in higher education. So I'm not going to make anyone guess, but my first figure is 200,000. And £200,000 is what studies show us, on average, a graduate will earn over their lifetime in excess of a non-graduate over the course of their earnings potential. That figure is quite stark, and it's open to some debate, I'm sure, but actually on average that is what the studies tell us in many markets around the world. And I think that in part goes to explain why demand for higher education around the world is rising so rapidly, and why this theme therefore of access to higher education is so important, because we know that higher education really can and does change people's lives for the better, helping people to move into better paid, more rewarding careers. So that's my first figure. The second figure is 70%. And that's the proportion of higher education leaders who think they're doing just that. They would say they're doing just that. So preparing their students really effectively for that transition into the world of work. But my third figure is 40%. And that's the proportion of businesses, employers that would agree with those higher education leaders. So that would say that students are coming to them fully equipped with the skills and capabilities needed to move into work. And then my last figure is the biggest one of all, 70 million actually, and 70 million is the number of college age people around the world who are currently out of work and who could really benefit, in my mind, from the skills and capabilities that great higher education has to offer them. So really simple figures. I appreciate it's a bit simplistic and generalising quite a lot, but I think does underscore why access and affordability and attainment in higher education are so important. And as I say, these are themes that as a company, I appreciate we're a for-profit, but as a company we care and think deeply about these themes. Our mission as a company is to help people make measurable progress in their lives through learning. That's what we say we're here to do. And that influences everything that we do and think about in Pearson. So our role is to help more people to access education, schools, higher education, lifelong learning. That at its heart is what every one of the 36,000 people that work in Pearson is trying to do, many of whom came from the world of education. And at its heart, therefore, that means that access and affordability and attainment are crucial. We can't achieve our mission if we can't help to solve for some of these themes, if we can't expand access, if we can't help to improve affordability, if we can't crucially deliver attainment, so outcomes in our world, or the way we talk of it. So that's why I think this theme is so important, and really I thought today it might be helpful, and I'll take your feedback on this, but to give firstly a quick overview of the structural trends the big economic trends that we see as we look around the world at education from our perspective. As I say, we are present in 80 countries, so we do look across education systems in many markets. So I thought I'd just touch on the big structural and economic trends that we see that are influencing these themes and making these themes ever more important, but also making them quite challenging to achieve. I was then going to talk about some of the key areas of our work that we think are helping to support access and attainment and affordability, particularly driven by technology and the role of technology in helping to support great teaching and learning. So that's the second area. And then thirdly, I'd like to come back to that theme of attainment outcomes and how we can really build a system that ultimately demonstrates that the learning that's happening in the classroom through all of our efforts, through all of the kind of contributions that we make, is actually delivering effective return, a return on investment, if you like, put it crudely, for the student in terms of their time, their money, the investment that they're making in education. So that's what I was going to cover. I'll probably talk for about no more than half an hour actually, and then I'd love to open this up for questions if that's possible. But if I go to that first theme of the big structural and economic trends, and this is quite a busy chart, but I just wanted to talk about why demand for higher education is rising. And I think part of the reason is because the value of a degree is continually rising too. So this chart really shows on the right-hand side what's happening in terms of the earnings gap between a college educated, this is US language, it's US data actually, a college educated household versus a high school educated household. And you can see that on average, a college educated household is earning around $58,000 more per annum than the high school educated household. So that's quite a stark contrast, and actually the value of a postgraduate degree is increasing even more rapidly than that. And I think as I reflect on that data, I think this is as much a kind of social as an economic kind of issue, frankly. I think I've seen a study recently that shows that around 70% of the kind of the increase in the income disparity in North America can be attributed back to that educational attainment gap. So it's a really important structural and social trend that we see on this chart that captures many issues. But I do think that starts to explain why demand for higher education, as we look at it around the world, is increasing rapidly, and it has continued to increase. So I was looking at a stat from The Economist recently where they quoted the global tertiary enrollment ratio, so the proportion of college-age people actually in higher education. And that's more than doubled actually over the last 20 years. It's gone from about 14% to around 32% today. And it's a trend that we expect to continue. So these are Pearson forecasts actually for what we think will happen with global higher education enrollments over the next 10 years, the next decade. And you can see that we expect there to be about 50 million more students entering the higher education space in 2025 than there are today. And you can see what that's being driven by. A number of countries, particularly Asia, growing very strongly. So global higher education demand continues to rise at an immense pace actually. But if demand is rising on the supply side, we think there's some big structural challenges, frankly, that we all face. And there's, again, a number of reasons. But what this chart is really showing is that the cost of education has gone up far faster than inflation. And over the same period, the public investment going into higher education has reduced. And it's reduced due to competing pressures, we know, from ageing populations, from different calls on public funding. But that creates a challenge because it means that around the world, and again, this is US data, and I appreciate what I just said doesn't doesn't apply to every country in the world, but it is a trend that we are seeing increasingly around the world. And what it means is that students in many countries, and their families actually, students and their families are increasingly being asked to contribute towards the cost of higher education. And that disproportionately impacts those on lower incomes. And that's the group that we know are already less well represented in higher education. So it's creating this kind of constraint in terms of access into higher education for groups that are already less well represented in the system. So that's a big structural supply challenge that we think we face in the system, given the number of students that are entering around the world. And the other point I suppose I'd make, and it's kind of returning to what I said at the start, that 40% versus 70%, for all that investment, whether it's public or private going into education, there's very little evidence to show that outcomes, achievements are actually improving as a result of that investment. So we talked about the stat between this mismatch between employer views of education, higher education, and the education providers themselves. So what, in terms of graduates that are coming quote unquote adequately prepared for work, whatever that means, but there is clearly a mismatch between what employers are looking for and what the education system would think they are achieving. And I appreciate the education system is not there purely for employment skills, but actually these are measuring on the same metric effectively. So employers that think students are coming prepared for work, educators who think they're preparing students for work. So that's quite stark. And then actually the last point I'd make on all of this is a kind of big trend is across all of this, we have to then layer on these big structural changes that are happening across the world of work. So by one popular estimate, and again, these are big headline numbers, but 65% of children entering primary school today, and I've got 2 of those children myself, so this is particularly pertinent, but 65% of them, the study says, will ultimately end up working in completely new job types that don't currently exist. So massive structural change happening, not just within the higher education system, but in terms of the ecosystem the higher education system is then flowing into. So big structural changes going on through the markets that we all work in. So, I suppose, and the last point I'd say on that is what that does mean, and what we see very clearly in markets all around the world, is that the skills that employers value are changing rapidly as well. So Pearson worked with CBI recently, the Confederation of British Industry, to do a survey of about 500 employers. And what really came out very clearly from that was that employers don't just value what people know, they value what people can do with that knowledge, applied learning, problem solving, critical thinking, things that we all know, but it just came across so clearly that the knowledge and the skills that people are acquiring is changing, and what employers value is changing. And I think to me that fuels the final trend that I'd pick up, which is that I've been working for 22 years actually, terrifyingly, but increasingly as people go through their working lives, they can't assume that they've got a skill and that stays with them. There's this need for continuous lifelong learning, this need to pick up new skills, new capabilities as you progress through your working lives. Big changes happening. So those are and I appreciate, and I'm very happy to take questions or be challenged on any of that data, but they're some of the big trends that we see, and we don't just see them in the UK. We look at those in North America, in Southeast Asia, in the Middle East, in Latin America, and these are trends that we see replicated across all the markets where Pearson's working right now. So that's a very quick run through of some very big topics, and I appreciate there's quite a lot in there, but that's certainly how we're looking at it from Pearson, as we look at it from the for-profit education space. What's driving, and what are we having to respond to as we think about why Pearson has a role to play? Does Pearson have a role to play, but why? And if we can't respond to those trends, then clearly we don't necessarily earn the right to play in this space. So it's really important that we stay across these trends. And I do think these structural trends actually present all of us, whether you're for-profit, not-for-profit, all of us working in higher education with real challenges, frankly. How do we expand access to really great higher education? How do we support higher education that's affordable and more accessible, and that ultimately delivers effective outcomes for the people that are entering the system? That, to me, is the big challenge. And this is where, at Pearson, certainly, we think technology does have a role to play. And I guess, as a headline, we'd say that technology has the power, ultimately, to help do all of that, to make learning more affordable, more flexible, more personalised, more effective, and ultimately lead to a better return for the student. But to be 100% clear, we don't think technology is a panacea. We are very, very clear that great teaching and great learning starts with great teachers and great pedagogy. as I say, more than half the people that work in Pearson are ex-educationalists themselves. They've come through the education system. So we have a really strong belief in great teaching and great learning, great pedagogy. But we do think technology can help to scale that. And we do think technology has a role. Because as I think about those elements, teaching, pedagogy, they've been important for 100 years. They'll be important for 100 years to come. And I know that I've certainly got examples of teachers that I can think back over my time, whether in school, whether in university, who really changed the direction of my life. So great teachers matter more than anything in all of this. But the challenge is, how do you scale that? How do you scale and how do you make that great teaching available to more people? And I do think technology can help to do that. So I'll talk a little bit now, but very briefly, about a couple of areas where we think that's happening and where we think we can show that technology is helping to scale great teaching, great learning in ways that are quite exciting as we look at them. And the first of those is in expanding access. So how is technology helping to expand access to higher education? And here we're very focused on the role of the online degree. And it doesn't have to be fully online, it could be blended, but the role of a degree program that's taught in a way that allows learners to access it and not necessarily have to be sat in the physical classroom at that same point in time, but can access it either remotely or digitally, or in a blended way in markets where they sit around the world. And the reason we're so focused on this is because online doesn't just help you to expand capacity, that constraint, that supply side constraint that we saw, it does help you expand capacity far more quickly than expanding physical capacity. But to me, more importantly, online meets the needs of an increasing population of students that are looking to study more flexibly. So and we've listed some people or different personality or people groups, if you like, that are looking to study more flexibly. So people that might be studying whilst in work, or whilst caring for family, or whilst in between jobs, or frankly whilst they're in a job and looking to gain new skills to move across or move into new roles. So technology and online degrees help expand capacity, access, but they also help to reach people in different ways, more personalised, more flexible ways. So we are very focused on this part of the business. This is an area that Pearson is really, really focused on. To be clear, we don't do this ourselves. We work with universities, we partner with great institutions, and we do that because we're very clear that we have some skills we think we bring to this, but ultimately this is about great teaching and great learning. So we work together, combining our respective strengths so that we can ensure that what happens in the classroom is available to more students around the world. So this is an area that we're very excited about. And I guess what I would say is, as we kind of drive into this area, what we are very, very clear on is that there is increasing evidence to show that this is working, that it is doing that, helping to expand access and helping more students to reach education that they couldn't otherwise do. So we've been working on this business here in the UK, in my area, for the last 18 months to 2 years actually, with some great partners. And we've got on those programs about students from around 50 countries in the world enrolled on those programs now, and they're growing rapidly. And those are students that couldn't necessarily access the physical experience that they're getting access to. But the other thing that online does is also start to address affordability, and it sounds kind of odd in this context, because online degrees can often be priced as high as, if not even higher than, the on-campus experience, because the idea is that they should be as good as, equivalent to, or even better than that on-campus experience. Otherwise, why would you put your investment into them? But the benefit for learners, particularly outside the UK, who are looking to use these forms of teaching and learning, is that they don't necessarily then carry all the other costs of the on-campus experience. So you can study whilst you're at home. You can study without having to incur the living costs, the other costs that are associated with an on-campus experience. So appreciate that doesn't work for everyone. It won't be the same experience. But for those people that are looking for either a more affordable or a more flexible way to teach, to access great higher education, we do think this has real potential. And actually where I'm most excited is as we think about how this evolves into a blended experience. So not just online, fully online, but actually helping to support teaching and learning in markets where we're present by either delivering faculty into those markets as part of the course, or actually having local teachers that can supplement the teaching and learning through classrooms in markets, but with that great access to the very best lecturers in these world-class institutions. So that's one area that we've been focused on. The other area that we do think technology can help to to deliver some returns is in terms of outcomes, actually. So this notion of attainment and how we ensure that people, learners within the classroom, are achieving the full return that they're looking for on their investment, whether that's their time or their money. And again, as I say, we are very, very clear that great teaching, great learning starts with great teachers and great pedagogy, but technology can help here, we think, because we can give those great teachers, by using data and smart assessments and other forms of feedback, we can give the great teachers in the classrooms real-time feedback on what's happening with their students. So which students are struggling, which concepts are they struggling with, and help ultimately to enrich the teaching and learning process by providing real-time data on performance that allows the student and the teacher to interact in different ways. So I was watching a video, actually. We've got a product in North America which we're just bringing out, and this is not a product picture by any stretch, but I was watching a video of one of our tutors in North America that works with Pearson, using a product that does this. It kind of brings together great content, partly designed by us, partly designed by the tutor, but with data and analytics kind of embedded. And the tutor said, actually, what has happened is amazing. What's changed is the whole dynamic in the classroom. So it's moved from the kind of the teacher at the front of the stage kind of teaching, I know you know a lot of this, but into a much more interactive relationship with the learner, so that they're actually learning together, is the way he described it. So they're using the data and the analytics and the kind of feedback to help them both learn at the same time and adjust accordingly. So it's really powering some quite interesting things. I appreciate that's, again, a big generalization, but it's quite exciting to see that. And that kind of leads me on to another way that we are looking at how data and kind of feedback and technology can help in enriching the teaching and learning process. And it takes me into this word personalised learning, which I often, and again, I'd love to be challenged and take questions, but personalised learning to me is a term that's often used in a way that I don't always agree with. It's not about necessarily doing what I just described, which is delivering a piece of content to a particular area where a student's struggling. To me, it's about making something that a student's struggling with relatable to a concept or an area that they feel more comfortable with, so that they can actually expand their confidence and build their learning through that. And here, I do think, again, technology can help, because technology can support the teacher in identifying those students that are struggling, or those concepts where they're struggling. So, for example, we've just started a partnership with IBM Watson to work with Watson's capability. And the idea here is that Pearson, through our knowledge of and our work actually that we do every day with teachers and learners, we can use that alongside Watson's AI capability to identify students that might be at risk or falling behind or struggling. And we do that not just from educational data, but from a range of other data, obviously with consent, etc. Data governance is something we take super seriously. But as you think about how you can use rich data sources to identify students that might be at risk of falling behind or dropping out, and then using the kind of natural language capabilities of Watson to actually then supplement, provide a real-time 24/7 support to students that might be struggling in ways that reach them at a time where they might need that support most. So again, not to replace, but to enable teaching and learning. And that's the idea of some of the work we're doing with Watson. I think it's really fascinating to see how that's working. And then, at the risk of falling flat in a presentation about technology and education, I was going to try and then show you a video, which might not work, of some other work that we're doing, which is, again, thinking about how you can make content with great teachers, with great pedagogy, but how can you make content, which is really what Pearson's business origins are. How can we make that more engaging, more interactive, more rich for the learning experience? And we're looking at doing that in a number of ways, working with great academics and teachers every day. But one of the areas that we're pushing into with quite a lot of interest is how you could use augmented reality or mixed reality to create access to learning environments that might not otherwise be available to a student. So we're doing some work, for example, in North America, in nursing, looking at how we can use holographic images. Frankly, it's very Star Warsy stuff in my mind. I'm showing my age, but the original Princess Leia type thing, but a holographic image of a patient that, powered by AI, can actually then interact with the learner, the student, and respond in different ways. Right now it's very binary. It's kind of the patient either recovers or not. But as we start to bring AI into that, I think we can start to see some different outcomes evolve and help, again, enrich the teaching and learning process in ways that not all students currently have access to. So I'm going to try and show this video. It might not work, but it's just a quick video of the work we are doing with Microsoft and their HoloLens product. So what we've got here is basically kind of mixed reality kind of images in classrooms that are being used in different ways, in the school context or in the high school or the college context. This is the patient I was describing, the holographic patient. And some of the organisations that we're working with, both here in the UK, but in North America and around the world. And I think, again, this is not to say that any of this will replace the classroom experience. What we do think is it can expand access to certain things that aren't currently available in classrooms. If I go into some colleges in the UK or in North America, if I think about medical, for example, it's not always possible to for example, study on a cadaver, on a human body. But actually, what you can do through Hololens is potentially create that same experience for students who were otherwise not denied access to that some of the best schools provide. So again, very early stage, lots of work for us to do, lots of investment to put into this, and not to say that this is necessarily the way that every classroom is going to go, but we're looking at this in certain areas, particularly in kind of high risk environments where putting a student into that space is not necessarily the best. There's other ways you can create that environment without necessarily creating and putting them into that risk environment. So we're doing some work, for example, with the UK military in this area as well. So they're just a few, and I appreciate that's been a really quick snapshot. I appreciate I've made a lot of generalisations in there, and that actually, a lot of that I suspect you already know or you've already heard from others. So we're by no means unique in what we're doing here, but we are very focused really in how we think about technology. So we don't see technology as a replacement for great teaching, great pedagogy. We see it as an enabler. And we do think that given those trends that we saw earlier, 50 million more students entering higher education, capacity issues in the system, this technology can help those students to access the world-class teaching and learning that happens here at LSE and happens in other environments in ways that aren't currently available to many people around the world. So that's how we're thinking about technology. But I guess and the reason I come back to measuring outcomes, the reason that we're thinking about, or one of the things that we're very focused on as we do this within Pearson, I mean, we are investing very heavily into this, and obviously we're for profit, so there's reasons, there's both a profit motive, but there's also, as I say, our mission ultimately is to support teaching and learning. And our previous chief executive, Marjorie Scardino, used to say it very nicely: profit kind of sustains us, it doesn't define us. And I think that is true of people you'll meet from Pearson, that we are a for profit in this space. We know we have to earn our right to be in this space, or frankly we shouldn't be there. So as we think about how we earn that right, we've been really focused for the last 7 or 8 years on how can we prove or demonstrate that actually we are helping support great teaching and learning. How can we really show that we are effective in what we do? And it's a challenge that we have been focused on, as I say, for about the last 4 or 5 years. And we've made a public commitment. We said that by 2018, alongside our audited financial statements, we will publish an audited, what we call efficacy statement, of all of our products and services to show whether we're delivering effective support. And that's a really complex academic challenge to isolate the factors that lead to great performance, but we're spending a lot of time and effort to try and do that. And I just wanted to touch on this, I won't dwell on it too long, but to do it we're using what is quite a simple framework. It was developed by a guy called Sir Michael Barber, who was our former Chief Education Advisor until March this year. He then went off to be the chair of the Office for Students, so he's moved from Pearson into the OFS as of March. But Michael worked in government for many years and thought about change systems, and developed a system that has been driving the big change journey that we've been on through Pearson for the last 7 or 8 years, as we thought, how can we demonstrate that we are actually contributing in some positive way to education. And it's a really simple framework, frankly, and I probably shouldn't say that because he built it, but it's actually quite a simple one. But because at its heart it says we need to measure 4 things, and we need to do it really effectively. So the first step is to be clear what outcomes we're actually trying to achieve from whatever teaching and learning process we're supporting through either our products or our services. So being really, really clear on the outcomes that we're looking to support. And it sounds so obvious, because if you don't do it, it's a bit like getting in a car and setting off without ultimately working out where you're trying to get to. You might get there, but you might many times not. So be really clear what we're trying to achieve. And we do it through a variety of different tools and techniques. So we use logic models, we use outcomes workshops, different ways to define the learning outcome that we're trying to support. Then we attach some evidence, so we attach clear metrics to make sure that we can measure that we're actually achieving those outcomes. And then we really focus on planning and implementation. So how do we know that we've got the rigor in the system, the governance to actually deliver and know that those metrics are accurate and they're consistent and they're believable and they frankly can stand up to public scrutiny in a way that we have said we will. So being audited by external agents to kind of make sure that the data and the analytics are robust and rigorous. And then the last point is, to me, really, really super important as we think about technology in education, this notion of capacity to deliver. And at its heart, this is about training and supporting the system to move with the product or service that we're supplying. So change management at its heart. And the reason I say it's so important in particular in the work we're doing in EdTech is I used to be responsible for our businesses in Latin America and Middle East before I was in my current role. And I used to walk into classrooms there where we'd supplied technology, but it was sat in boxes gathering dust. And that's pathetic, and we should be ashamed of the fact that we'd done that. But the reason it was sat in boxes gathering dust was because we hadn't supported the teaching staff in terms of the journey they're going through and using that technology in ways that they shouldn't be afraid of, but can support and enrich the teaching and learning process. And if we don't do that, then there's a fear, I think, within or not even a fear, frankly. I have it myself. I've got 2 kids and they are far, far better at many things technology, although they're only 6 and 9, than I am. So I'm kind of afraid to kind of engage with them on technology. So change management, I think, is a crucial part of the kind of the use and the effective use of technology in education. And if we don't do that, all of us collectively, then I've seen too many examples of where that's failed, frankly. And it's not just in those markets I mentioned. Pearson got into some quite negative press in North America in the Los Angeles Unified School District, where we were working with Google actually to roll out what I would say is an amazing curriculum, a digitally enabled, tablet-enabled digital curriculum. And we fell foul of the fact that we hadn't worked together with the system to think about the capacity. So actually the infrastructure wasn't in place to support one-to-one technology in the way that we built it. It was a beautiful product, it was a beautiful experience, but actually the system couldn't accept it. And so we've got to work through the system and make sure the system is ready. That's a key learning. So that's a very quick, well, not so quick actually, I went on it too much, but it's something that we are very, very focused on. We're also super focused that we don't have all the ideas here. So when Michael published this first framework back in 2013, he called it the Incomplete Guide to Learning Outcomes, because we are all super clear that we don't have by any stretch all the answers. So we're working with other companies, our competitors, other parts of the system to think about how we can make this more rigorous, more robust, more akin to that word efficacy that obviously comes from medicine, but that can actually demonstrate that products and services and educational interventions are effective. It's something that, as I say, I'm very clear if we can't do that, then we don't really earn our right to be at the kind of table as a for-profit in this space. So that's an area we are very, very focused on. I mean, the other thing we are doing as part of this is we're publishing it all openly. So in the spirit of these open ed sessions, everything I've talked about is available on our website. It's completely open access. All of the frameworks, all the tools, all the methodology we're using, all the research that we do into areas like AI. We worked with a number of agencies to publish open research into areas like this in EdTech. We've just published a series of reports actually on technology in education that might be relevant. If you go to our website, it's all there, it's all open. Because again, we are very, very clear that whilst we are a big for-profit, but we're a tiny, tiny part of this whole system. And we're super clear that if we can't work within the system and as part of the system, then we won't achieve what we've set out to do and to help more people make progress in their lives through learning. So that's Pearson, and that's I hope that's helpful. That's just a quick view of the world that we look at from the for-profit space. So big structural changes happening. None of that replaces or undermines, to my mind, it super reinforces the need for great teaching, great learning, great teachers, great pedagogy. But we do think that there is a role that can be supported and enabled by some of the work that we're doing in assessment, in technology, in different forms of data and analytics that help to enrich that process. And again, we are very, very clear that we're small and that it's only by engaging and working with all parts of the education system that we can actually set out to, or even have a shot of achieving our mission to help more people make progress in their lives through learning. So that's Pearson. So I hope that's been helpful. I appreciate it's a lovely sunny afternoon in London, so I'm very grateful for you spending the time to listen to me. But I'd love to hear your questions and I'd love to hear your challenges, to tell me it's all rubbish what I've just said. So,
yeah, any questions?
Hi.
Do you do any stalking of MOOCs? Why do I ask?
Yes.
Because I developed a MOOC that has now attracted more than 450,000
Yeah.
learners.
Yeah. No, I'm super excited about MOOCs. I know that they've been through a different phase in terms of. So I think what MOOCs represent to me is what we've just been talking about. Actually, a way to through open access to give learners the access to very great teaching and learning. I think the challenge for MOOCs, if we're all honest, has been retention. Actually, I've signed up to many MOOC courses myself through Coursera, through FutureLearn, and I've tried to do them while I'm doing my ironing, or but actually I don't go back, and I'm part of the retention problem actually. So I think MOOCs have got an amazing role to play actually. I think the challenge that we face is how we make sure that the MOOC is actually, and actually I suppose the other thing I would say about MOOCs is, as we look at the data, oftentimes what you see is the people that are on MOOC courses are people who've already got a degree, and they've got degrees, they're working, they're looking, they have access in ways that maybe the people that MOOCs originally set out to be for don't still have access to. So I do think MOOCs have a role, absolutely. And we're doing some work with edX at the moment, frankly, where we're looking through our online degrees about how we can work with MOOC providers to kind of create credit-bearing modules that then get recognition into postgrad degrees or potentially undergraduate degrees. Obviously that differs in different markets how credit recognition works, but I do think it's really powerful. I think it can be a super powerful way of driving down the cost of certain learners in terms of accessing credit and gaining skills. And sorry, it's a long-winded answer, but the other area I'm very excited about, or what I see MOOCs, and I suspect MOOCs will ultimately move into, is the world, that gap between employment and skills. So areas where not necessarily a 3-year full degree is needed by employers, and there's a number of areas where employers would say we don't necessarily need a full 3-year degree student actually to achieve the skills that they need. So I was looking at Udacity recently, who've just done some work in driverless car technology, and I think they've been working with some of the big technology companies to think about short courses that they could deliver at a cost, so they're not free actually at that point, but at a cost that are tailored specifically to engineers who are looking to move into driverless vehicle technology roles, backed by employers. So employers potentially then create a route for those students to progress into. So I think the evolution of MOOCs are by far and away not dead. I mean, for sure, I think they are a really powerful force. But I don't think, we wrote a report in Pearson actually back in 2012. Michael Barber, again, and his team wrote it, called The Avalanche is Coming. And I suspect massively overstated the case for MOOCs if I go back and look at it now, because it felt like one of those big structural changes that was going to happen. I still think it's happening, but it's not an avalanche. I think it's more like I don't know what the analogy is. I'm a geographer, so I should be able to think of it. But I think MOOCs play a role, and they will continue to play a role. And I think they will play a role particularly in that space where a 3-year degree isn't necessarily what's needed to equip yourself with the skills for employment. As I think about my own career, for example, I would be particularly interested in courses that I could do, short courses that might take my career in different ways. So whereas otherwise I might traditionally have to go back and do another 3-year degree. Does that, do you agree, or do you completely disagree?
No, that's fine.
Hi.
I know what you're talking about when you talk about FutureLearn and short courses, but MOOC, is that an acronym for something else?
Oh, sorry, yes. Yeah, so it stands for Massive Open Online Course. It became very, very fashionable. Certainly, as I was looking at it in Pearson, it became a very big fad, terrible word. It became very kind of big trend, actually, that everyone was talking about back in early part of this decade, actually, 2010, 2011, 2012. And it started through a couple of companies like edX and Udacity, with some big courses. Actually, Sebastian Thrun, I think, who founded Udacity, he created one of the first MOOCs in I want to say artificial intelligence. I might have got myself confused. But so just basically taking courses and making them very free and open and available to anybody around the world with a laptop or a mobile phone.
Are we not in danger of just on MOOCs?
Yes.
Measuring them in an old paradigm.
Yeah.
You talk about retention.
Yes.
I mean, retention in an environment like LSE, where there are huge costs.
Yep.
To enable one person to sit in one lecture theatre.
Yep.
It costs a lot of money to do that, so the incremental cost. Whereas the incremental cost of having another person log on to the MOOC
Yes.
is probably next to zero.
Totally agree.
So
yeah.
I just wonder if
Yeah.
measuring success of a MOOC in a wrong way?
I think it's a great point, actually. I think, yes, and I agree. I think actually I look at them with probably a traditional lens as well, actually. So retention, as you think through full course completion, actually. Whereas actually, if I think about the courses I've done or signed up to, part of the reason I didn't go back is because I sort of learned as much as I wanted to learn about the course. So I didn't necessarily need to complete. I wasn't looking for credit, and it didn't offer credit, actually, but I kind of learned what I was trying to get about that subject. So I did one in disruptive innovation in technology, I think it was, and I was learning about some of the stuff we're talking about. But I probably didn't have to complete the course, actually, whereas the traditional measure is see it all the way through, and then and certainly as MOOCs think about how they monetize and how they are, again, for profits largely. Well, not always, actually, but part of the challenge they've had is how they kind of do monetize what they stand for. It sounds terrible and crude and commercial, but it's they've had a problem about what they do in terms of their revenue model. So I think they've been thinking about retention, but you're absolutely right. I think it's a different form of skills training, actually, and if you think about skills and micro skills and the way that skills can be chunked up, then MOOCs again have a really important role to play, I think. I mean, one thing I would say though is, and I was talking to some of the guys who run some of these businesses, they differ into, and again, I do think actually that framework that we looked at about, even if they are not intended to be measured by the same structures, I think they do have to be very clear about how they are delivering effective education. Because to me, a MOOC that just takes a kind of classroom and sticks it on screen, it's not the most engaging way to kind of interact with somebody in an online environment. So I do think MOOCs, as they use assessment and feedback and formative assessment and different forms of assessment into the courses, then I think they become much richer and more engaging, frankly, for the learner. Hi.
Question?
Mine's not about MOOCs. Is yours still about MOOCs?
No.
I wish to move on from that. You were talking about blended learning, and I think you said Pearson's can deliver faculty into the class.
Right. Yes. So it's a model that we've been looking at, and it's very much in pilot phase. But we are thinking about how we can create, again, the great learning experience and the engaging learning experience for learners who are in different markets. So the pilots we're running are in places like India and China. And what's clear is that online, I firmly believe online education has a very strong role to play, but it's not necessarily going to suit everyone's learning styles. And that classroom interaction, I think, is a really important part. It certainly was of my kind of education journey. So we've been thinking, Pearson has networks of learning centres in different markets. We use them both to support English language training, for example, in markets like China, or to deliver different forms of training. We've been thinking, well, how could we take an online course working with institutions in the UK or the US or Australia or other markets, and in a classroom in a town or a village in India, how can we use some of our learning centres to create a learning environment that allows access online, either synchronous, so real-time, or asynchronous, to teaching and learning, but also would have teaching assistants, faculty in the classroom to help solve some problems, so that it's not just all done in a purely online way. So we're thinking, is there a way that we can use those classrooms that we have, those learning centres, to support the teaching and learning without necessarily having to fly faculty in, because that's not scalable and it's not particularly affordable, actually, for the markets that we work in. So is there a way that we can work with local teaching staff, faculty, to support what's happening in the classroom, but still have access to those amazing lecturers, those amazing teachers that sit in some of these institutions that you wouldn't otherwise have access to? So I appreciate that's not how everyone defines blended. It's one of the ways that we've been thinking about it. Is there a way to deliver online into a classroom, but supported by teaching support with people that can support the teaching, respond to questions, aren't necessarily the experts, but they have enough knowledge to be able to support learners as they kind of struggle with concepts, etc. So it's, in my mind, it's an online experience, but it's in a classroom, weirdly. Does that make sense?
So with Pearson learning support people, is that?
Yes. In that case, yes. Or with partner institutions, actually. I mean, again, we're very clear that we can't do all of this on our own, so we're trying to think about how we partner with other institutions, other agencies to do this. And we certainly haven't cracked the model. I mean, we are just piloting in markets like China and India and Latin America, but we do think it can help supplement online learning, because it can be, I think it can enrich it by giving, through online access to it breaks down that space and kind of cost constraint of moving faculty into different markets. So it allows you to scale that side of things, but it also tries to replicate an element of the classroom experience so that the learner has more support. Does that answer your question? Great.
Just follow on with a supplementary on that.
Yes.
Since we missed a supplementary. Just taking that idea
Yep.
of a learning centre where the students come in, what might be in it for the academic?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
at best the academic might think they're being de-skilled.
Yep.
And at worst, if the academic is replaced by a
Yep.
person,
Yep.
they're actually being unemployed. So what's your thinking on the impact on the
Yeah.
academic, what might be in it?
No, well, I'm pleased you raised it actually, because I think, and again, it's back to that point that we are very, very clear that we're not trying to and can't, and we'll never replace we work with teachers, we're not trying to replace them. But so how, and it's a good question. I'm testing myself. I actually don't know the answer to your question in terms of how the relationship with the academics works in terms of how, and I don't know if your question is kind of reputational, financial, or all of those above, but I'm sure there is a way that this works for, we do this in partnership with the people we work with. We don't, so I can't give you a direct answer. If I could take your details, I'll try and get you an answer, but I don't actually know exactly how it works. Yes.
The model you described is pretty much how the University of London distance learning works.
Yes.
For example, if there's an LSE authored course,
Yep.
LSE academics here producing materials
Yep.
which go out to students,
Yep.
the local institutions in, say, Hong Kong, where there are local staff
Yep.
teaching those courses based
Yep.
on those materials. But the students they're teaching in Hong Kong are a different market. These very few of these students would ever be able to come to London and study at
I agree.
LSE.
No, I agree.
So it's,
Yep.
I think that's the answer. It's just a different market.
I think it's a different model, and as you say, we're certainly not the only ones doing this. The area we've tended to focus on is because we come from the corporate world. We're working with local employers oftentimes as well. So, but I agree, it's very similar to the distance learning models that have existed, paper-based distance learning models as well in some cases. But exactly right, it's a different form of and it's a different access to the student. So it creates a new market effectively. Yeah, I agree.
So this is a model that is really focused on the overseas market. It's
Yeah.
not a model that
Completely, yeah. Yeah, it's trying.
here.
Yeah, I mean, the way we're trying to think of it is how can you break down barriers around cost, etc. Now, obviously, we are for profit, so we look at things that are commercially viable. But I still think there's a way that you can drive down cost into markets and deliver effective education that works for everyone who's involved in that venture. Actually, so yes, explicitly, this is in markets where students want to access, say, US, UK, Australia education. South Africa, in some cases, we've got an institution ourselves in South Africa. But can't physically do that either through space constraints, visa constraints, sadly, in the world that we live in today, or cost constraints. So how can we help to solve for that? And so that's one of the problems we've been trying to solve for.
I was interested in whether you're in some ways productising these courses and standardising them across the markets
Yeah.
that you go to, and also sort of a corollary to that, the amount of adaptation you do according to your students' feedback, their ability of English and
Yeah. No, it's a great question. So and to be clear, I mean, the examples I've been talking about are really where we're partnering with a higher education institution or another kind of learning institution. So actually we're working together. So oftentimes what Pearson would do is try and support that work by thinking about, our capabilities in assessment, our digital assessment capabilities, or our experience in online degrees, and how can we enrich the teaching and learning process. To your question about, are we trying to standardise? No, I mean, I think what we're trying to do though is, I suppose, it's identify elements that can scale in that process. So how can we work with, oftentimes one of the gating, one of the barriers to scale is faculty time, faculty capacity, etc., and then physical capacity. So how can we, through what Pearson can bring to this, how can we help to break down some of those barriers? But actually, and then to your question on student feedback, that's something, it goes back to the framework that we talked about. That framework that I put up, that Michael Barber designed, at its heart, it's all about this continuous feedback from students, from learners, from academics, actually, because if I'm honest, Pearson, if I go back 20 years, we've been around 170 years. As I say, we were born and bred in North Yorkshire, but if I go back 20 years, we were very much focused on inputs to education, and we still are in quite a lot of markets. You know, we are known as a textbook publisher, I think, in many places still, because we are still a textbook publisher. So we're really focused on inputs only. What therefore we weren't very good at, frankly, was listening to learners, listening to teachers, and so that feedback loop didn't exist in Pearson probably 20 years ago in the way that it does today. We've been really, really clear as we put that framework in place that we can only really stand hand on heart and say our products are working if we're getting feedback from the system in a way that is completely systematized, actually. So now, today, we've completely changed all of our systems and processes to make sure that we get feedback from students, to make sure that we get feedback from lecturers, the people that we work with. Is it working perfectly? Absolutely not. Still, you know, we're going through a big change exercise ourselves as an organisation. Other examples, and I think, so the other thing I would say is by shining a light on our products and services, it's kind of shown us some really kind of, you know, some important truths actually about where we've got products and services that aren't effective, frankly. And I think the test of this has been, and I'm sorry to talk about Pearson, it shouldn't all be, but the big test of whether this was going to be the change exercise we were trying to do was how do we react to that data? And I think it's been really telling. We've actually pulled out some products, we've actually divested some products and services because we couldn't hand on heart say that they were helping to support what we're trying to do. And it's not to say, so we're kind of, well, we're 6 years into a big change journey for Pearson. We're still not there, we've still got a lot of work to do, but I think, you know, the feedback from, and building those feedback loops into our product development has been a core part of this actually.
I think it's a related question. So, do you have a view on the suitability of AI and learner analytics when you're talking about blended learning?
Right.
You don't have a complete picture of
the
learner.
Do you know, I suspect you probably know better than I do. I mean, I think what I would say, so we published a report on AI last year actually, and again, it's all open if it's helpful, but we're just literally scratching the surface in terms of the potential of AI. We don't know the answer to that question, I don't think. I think we're just starting out on that journey. I'm super confident that AI can really enrich teaching and learning in ways that we don't fully understand right now. We are really trying to focus on it. The areas where we have tended to focus historically aren't really AI. It's been much more on how we use data and to create adaptive learning pathways, which I suppose is one element of it. But I couldn't give you a very good answer to that. I suspect the answer is we don't know right now. I mean, do you have a view on it?
No, I don't. I mean, I've seen examples of the use of learning analytics like at the OU.
Yep.
And I thought, well, how can that be applied where we don't have all of the learning interactions about our students?
Yes.
What goes on in the classroom.
I mean, the other.
How applicable is it?
And again, this is where and back to that framework, where we've had real problems actually is how do you isolate actually what's driving the outcomes that we see? And you know, we've used lots of different methods, and there's some very smart, much smarter people than I am doing regression, all sorts of different analyses to try and isolate what's driving learning. But actually, it's you know, learning is a messy process. It's complex. It can't be deconstructed in that way. And it's great for all those reasons, but it makes it very complex to answer questions like that. Where I do think it is really interesting, though, I mean, the example I mentioned about this. About how you can create the very, very best of what happens in the top leading institutions, but isn't available to everyone because it is either due to cost or due to kind of limited supply. It's just not going to be available to students who are sat in colleges in different parts of the world. And I do think AI and different forms of some of the stuff we're starting to see, this augmented and mixed reality capability, I think can over time, it's not there yet, but it can over time start to replicate that in ways that I think will be really interesting and will hopefully democratise some of those great things that happen in those great classrooms.
Retention would be quite a good way for just a straightforward measurement of how people are progressing.
Yeah.
Do you have any feedback on early courses that you've done on retention?
Yes, we do. Yeah, and well, firstly, I totally agree. And I think, and as I think about that in the market I work in now, the UK market, you know, this notion of learning gain, and I mean, it's all got wrapped up in the TEF and all of that. But actually, at its heart, the notion of distance travelled and learning gain, I think, is a really important one. Actually, you know, knowing that. So where we've done most work on this, actually, though, is in North America, because that's where we know there is one of the biggest retention challenges, actually. And one of the charts earlier, I think, showed it in terms of percentage completions through North America, 4-year and 2-year, and it's kind of woefully low, actually, for many reasons. So yeah, I do think big data and analytics can really help on that, and we've been doing quite a lot of work to look at not just pure educational data actually, but the whole system data. And this is where we have to be very careful about, and we are very, very clear that data governance and data protection is critical to this. So this has to be done openly, transparently, with consent. But actually, by using different forms of data analytics, how often is it? Can you identify what makes a great student succeed? And again, that's a very complex question. But are there certain things that students do that we know then, if you identify them not doing it, creates an alarm signal, a warning bell that just might be an early warning indicator to intervene and bring in an intervention? That's what we're doing a lot of actually in North America. And I do think it can be really effective, and it won't, again, solve for everything, but it might just give us more information with which to go in at the right time or ahead of the student dropping out. So yeah, I agree. I think it's a really important area. Hi.
Have you done the complementary side of what makes a good student stick at it and succeed?
Right.
In the sense of what makes a good tutor or a good academic help a student succeed?
Yeah.
I'm just thinking of the information transfer now of the online or the MOOC.
Yep.
But I'm thinking of the student has a problem.
Yep.
And if you're online on a MOOC and there's nobody on the other side.
Yeah.
I'm thinking of the commercial analogy. Now when you're trying to do something online and you press quit, and the chat box comes up.
Yes.
Chat.
Yep.
And there's evidence that those chat boxes help retain.
Yes.
So it's that same idea. At the point you're about to quit the course, and you press quit, the chat box comes up to an academic or something like that.
Yes.
Completely.
Yeah.
Done any work?
We're doing work on that actually, yes, absolutely. And it's trying, and again, the work we're doing with IBM Watson, I think, is right at the heart of that. So it's trying to identify those warning signals and then create an intervention. It could be an online intervention, it could be a physical intervention. It depends to some extent on capacity, it depends on cost, it depends on a variety of things, but absolutely that's what we're doing. And I think it's super exciting because I think it can really help, or it can be one part of the things that help to address that. So yes, we are. And again, if it's helpful, there's quite a lot of research we've done on this that is on the Pearson.com website if you wanted to have a look, or I can happily, if I take your details, I can forward you some stuff. But actually where we've been most focused on that today has been North America, because it has been the more pressing, well, it's been the market with the most obvious kind of pressing need. But actually, as I think about what that means in terms of TEF, or whatever TEF becomes through the course of our crazy political system at the moment, at its heart, that notion of giving the teacher and the learner some data on performance, I think is a good one. Actually, I have to say, I'll nail my kind of colours to my sleeve. I don't think that in itself is a bad thing. I think the way it's been kind of mashed into different forms of policy is maybe the problem. But no, so I think it is really super relevant for the UK as well. Hi.
I'm glad you mentioned obviously Pearson, and I see there's a few analogies to traditional delivery methods.
Yes.
And I wondered if you could say something a little bit more about the culture in Pearson.
Yeah.
It's changed.
Yeah.
Highly innovative.
Well, it's changing, I'd say.
What could LSE learn from that? Because there are...
Gosh, I'll tell you. Well, I'll tell you some things. Not all of which my boss, I suspect, would agree with. But well, one thing I'd say is it's super hard. I mean, we've been on a massive change journey. And the other thing I get asked a lot internally when I do sessions is, when will the change stop? And the answer, frankly, certainly within Pearson, within the space we live in, it's never going to stop. I mean, it's the nature of the fact that we have to evolve and adapt, which is uncomfortable actually when you think of it for all of us. So one, I'd say it's very, very hard. Two, I think it has to be driven by a really clear vision. And I think, whether you believe what Pearson is trying to stand for or not, I think there is a very strong sense of mission actually in the organisation, that notion that we are there for something. And so I think that common rallying cry is crucial. And I think you've got to then really think about the systems and the processes, because the what we've called efficacy, and it's a really crude word because it doesn't, I know, translate very well to education. But when Marjorie, our previous chief exec, brought Michael Barber in and created what effectively became this change management process, you've got to have a real focus on systems and ways to do that, because we were trying to change the hearts and minds of, at the time, 40,000 people in Pearson. And it's a super difficult thing to do, and not everyone wants to do it actually. So that's the other thing. We've been through a lot of difficult barriers, and we still face it. So I mean, the other thing I would say is, you very kindly said we're a long way through it. We're not. I mean, we're still changing, and there's still big pockets of Pearson where we're very traditional actually, and that can be a good thing as well. That's the other thing we've learned actually. Don't assume that all things have to change actually. There's lots of good things that you have to build from, and where we've made mistakes actually, we've tried to probably throw out the baby with the bathwater. Do you know what I mean? We've probably not recognised the good things that were happening, and there's been this intense focus on change, and therefore you lose sight of some of your core values, and you've got to keep those very clear actually. I don't know if that answers the question, but yeah, no, but it's tough. But it's a tough journey, and it's certainly a tough one as I think about the teams I work with and trying to kind of that question that I get asked a lot: when will the change end? And it's a really hard answer to say it's not going to end. I mean, we are in this world that's hyper connected. It's changing rapidly. It's not to say it's all, and I suppose my natural instinct is to positivity around that. I quite like it. I like the opportunity that it creates. But it also, you've got to be aware that not everyone reacts like that. Not everyone embraces change, and therefore, supporting people whichever way they're in, I think, is crucial as you go through the journey.
Okay. Can we thank Andy then?
Thank you.